It's 7 o'clock in Montreal, 8 o'clock in Fredericton, and 5 o'clock in Red Deer, Alberta. This is Canada Tonight. Unjust. A federal court rules Ottawa's use of the Emergencies Act was unreasonable. Haley versus Trump. We're live in New Hampshire as results roll in on primary night. Meeting at the intersection tonight. Roland Martin, Sean Spicer, Kyle Jacobs, and Omar Khan to discuss the conclusions on the convoy and the tug-of-war in the Republican race. And on tonight's Spotlight, killers of the Flower Moon star Tantoo Cardinal and her criticism of former friend Buffy St. Marie.
From the Canadian Broadcasting Centre, this is Canada Tonight with Travis Dhanraj.
And a very good evening to you. Here is what else we are tracking on this Tuesday. We're going to take you to British Columbia this hour. Investigators are on the scene of a remote heli skiing crash that killed 3 people. We'll also go live to our reporter in the Northwest Territories as Fort Smith's Health Centre deals with a mass casualty event connected to a plane crash this morning. But we begin in Ottawa, where the federal government once again finds itself having to defend its use of the Emergencies Act. A federal court found the government's decision to invoke the act during the 2022 convoy protests in Ottawa was unreasonable.
It was a hard decision to take. We took it very seriously. It was the necessary thing to do. I remain, and we remain, convinced of that.
Today's ruling is the result of a case brought forward by the Canadian Civil Liberties Association and other groups. They argued Ottawa ushered in measures without sound statutory grounds. Federal Court Justice Richard Mosley agreed, ruling that the protests did not meet the legal threshold for a national emergency. Now that it is contrary to the findings of last year's mandatory public inquiry, which said that the feds, well, they were justified in using the act. Okay, let's get more now. We're live to Karina Roman in Ottawa, who has been tracking this all day long. And Karina has been reading the decision, which is nearly, I think, 200 pages. Karina, walk us through here some of the highlights of the ruling.
Okay, so in terms of the highlights, his reasoning for his conclusion that the justice is unreasonable, unjustified, looking specifically at Section 2B of the Charter of Rights, which is freedom of expression, and Section 8, which is about search and seizure. I'm going to read part of the decision or conclusion in which basically Judge Mosley sums it all up, saying, I have concluded that the decision to issue the proclamation does not bear the hallmarks of reasonableness, justification, transparency, and intelligibility, and was not justified in relation to the relevant factual and legal constraints that were required to be taken into consideration. So that's his conclusion. And then, of course, most of these 200 pages are his reasoning for how he got there. He did say that Cabinet had the authority to make this decision. It just made the wrong decision, that it was no national emergency, the potential for serious violence, not enough of a reason to support the conclusion that the convoy created what he called a critical, urgent, and temporary situation that was national in scope. It was not national in scope, he says. And it's also not a situation that couldn't have been effectively dealt with under other laws in Canada, except perhaps here in Ottawa. He does understand, he says, that the situation here was very difficult, quite different from what happened in other parts of the country, and that perhaps the declaration could have been tailored in that way to deal just with Ottawa or just with Ontario. He also talked quite a bit about Section 8, as I said, of the Charter, this but search and seizure, because he said there was really the measure to freeze people's bank accounts while understanding the rationale behind it, Travis, says that it was done in such a way that did not minimally impair people. It caught too many people up in its web and had too much of an impact, too broad an impact, and that there was no effort to find a solution to the problems that it caused.
Okay, so obviously the ruling pretty deep, Karina. We're going to get a lot of reaction to this, including from Yasser Naqvi, who is the MP for Ottawa Centre, where this occupation took place, and also reaction from Christine Van Geyn, who was part of a group who brought this actually to federal court. But what other reaction are we hearing so far?
Well, the cabinet ministers who were at the table came out today. You heard earlier, of course, Chrystia Freeland saying that they wouldn't change their mind, that they recall that day, those weeks, and that they would have made the same decision. And they were quite quick to say they would decide that they've decided that they will appeal. So have a listen to the Justice Minister and what he had to say on that front.
We also know that a member of the Court of Appeal, Justice Rouleau, conducted a very public, comprehensive and transparent investigation into the reasonableness of the government's decision. That decision stands at odds with the decision that was rendered today. I think that is important, and that also informs our decision and our basis upon which we will proceed to an appeal.
Now, of course, opposition, such as Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservatives, also reacting. The Conservatives were never in favor of the invoking of the Emergencies Act. And today, Pierre Poilievre tweeted saying, "Judge rules Trudeau broke the highest law in the land with the Emergencies Act. He caused the crisis by dividing people. Then he violated charter rights to illegally suppress citizens. As Prime Minister, I will unite our country for freedom." We also heard from one of the convoy organizers, not one that is necessarily that well known in terms of testimony at the Rouleau Commission, but nevertheless saying that she's surprised by the ruling and wonders what it will actually mean. Have a listen.
Will there be consequence for freezing bank accounts of Canadian citizens who were doing nothing wrong? Will there be consequence for Trudeau, Freeland, and Mendocino? That's yet to play out, but it's nice to see the pendulum swing in our favor for once.
Now, of course, there's also reaction from the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, which brought this case, this challenge at court, saying that emergencies is not in the eye of the beholder, that there are laws around this, and as well expressing disappointment that the government has indicated it will appeal the decision. Have a listen.
It's unfortunate in our view that the government is trying to defend the use of emergency powers, which gave them so much ability to restrict people's rights and freedoms outside of the ordinary democratic process. And that's why we fought it, and that's why we're going to continue fighting it.
Now, there is some nuance in this ruling, Travis, in that Judge Mosley, he says that if he had been at the cabinet table in that moment, he may have also made the same decision to invoke the Emergencies Act. So there is some room there and sympathy there in terms of understanding, you know, where heads were at in that moment and at that time. Whether that means that an appeal by the federal government will be successful or not, that remains to be seen. But clearly the government ready to appeal and wanting to get some clarity exactly on what the rules around the Emergency Act should be.
Okay, Karina, appreciate it. I know it's been a long day in Ottawa for you with all this breaking news today. Thank you for that. We're going to get, so that's the details on the story. Now we're going to get two very different viewpoints on what happened and this decision. Joining me now to discuss the ruling is Christine Van Geyn. She is the litigation director at the Canadian Constitution Foundation. Now that foundation, along with the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, as you just heard Karina talking about, brought this case to the federal court. And joining us from Ottawa is Yasser Naqvi. He's the MP for Ottawa Centre. That is where the occupation took place. He was also parliamentary secretary for former Minister of Emergency Preparedness, Bill Blair. Yasser, Christine, thank you so much for joining me. So Yasser, I'm going to start with you. And I think it's important to just kind of rewind back and paint a picture as to what your riding was going through back in 2022 when the assault was taking place.
Well, Travis, thank you very much. And it was a very challenging time for my community of Ottawa Centre. We basically saw a 4-week-long occupation of downtown Ottawa, which meant that we're not just talking about occupation in front of the Parliament building, but Wellington Street, which is a very important street in the downtown Ottawa, impact on the businesses in the downtown core, which were just starting to recover from the pandemic, and the thousands of residents who live in the downtown core. We're talking about complete a blockage of the entire downtown in Ottawa. We're talking about diesel fuming from those big trucks running 24/7 essentially, and you could feel and smell the smell of diesel fumes in the air. not to mention incessant honking all through days and nights, which made it impossible for residents of my community to even sleep. It was a very challenging time. It was nowhere close to a peaceful protest that we are so used to seeing in Ottawa, given this nation's capital. It left no choice for the government in the end of the day to invoke the Emergencies Act to put an end to the protest, because we saw a failure on the part of the provincial government to take any meaningful action at that time.
Okay, so let me let Christine in here, but I do want to follow up on some of your points there, Yasser. But Christine, let's get your reaction to this ruling, and then your thoughts on what Yasser has to say there about what he was dealing with, what members of that community were dealing with, and the nation when this was all going on.
So I'm absolutely ecstatic with this decision. I think this is a wonderful day for civil liberties in Canada. And I think whatever your political stripe, I think all Canadians understand the importance of the right to protest in a democracy. The right to publicly express yourself is often one of the ways that people who have very limited power can express themselves. And we understand and we expect that protests are messy, protests are disruptive, protests can temporarily block traffic. Now, of course, a blockade is not a protected form of expression. Blockades can be removed. Ultimately, the police, of course, would be justified in removing a blockade of Wellington Street, which I will mention is often blocked by other protests, just as they're justified in removing blockades from the bridges at the 401 and Avenue Road in Toronto. It's not a right to just blockade infrastructure. But on the other hand, what's important to know is that the overreach here was the government's response by invoking this extraordinary legislation. And for context, because I know Mr. Yasser Naqvi has given us the context of how disruptive the protests were for his community. I have no question that they were disruptive. But what's important to remember is how extreme the government response is. The Emergencies Act functions as a de facto constitutional amendment. It allows the executive, the cabinet and the prime minister, to create new criminal law by executive order without parliamentary debate, without any prior notice. And it is exactly what they did with the invocation of the Act and the subsequent regulations, the freezing of bank accounts and the prohibition on attending to gatherings, including nonviolent peaceful gatherings of people simply holding signs. So those are the things that this judge, Justice Mosley, found were unjustified, unconstitutional.
So, okay, let me just pick up on your point and put that to you, Yasser, because, in full transparency, I lived in your riding when this was all going on. I was also covering it for CBC in the middle of it. It certainly was disruptive, but it was not like January 6th in the United States. Did this rise to the level of a national emergency? And why, in your opinion, did it, to Christine's points?
Well, Travis, not only was disruptive, it was not peaceful, and it was dangerous at times for many people that I heard from, whether they were from racialized communities, people who were disabled, or people, the Jewish members of my community who felt really scared going out, given that they had seen flags with Nazi symbols at that event. I mean, it was not a peaceful protest. And let's not forget that protest, so-called protest, turned into a blockade, turned into an occupation, and lasted for 4 weeks non-stop, and there was no end in sight. It is the invocation of Emergencies Act is a measure of last resort, and it was used as a measure of last resort after the declaration of emergency failed that was issued by City of Ottawa, after the provincial declaration of emergency by the Ford government. And in fact, once we saw that protest had actually started impacting other parts of the country, we had multiple border crossings that were blockaded, whether it's Coots Crossing or at Windsor. This was not only was having a huge impact on a community in downtown Ottawa, but it was starting to have a tremendous impact economically on our country, and the government, federal government, had no option left in the end of the day but to invoke the Emergencies Act. And that was validated by the independent commission that was led by Justice Rouleau as a result of the requirement outlined in the Emergencies Act after such invocation.
And Christine, on that, it was causing an economic impact. I remember when the White House was coordinating with Ottawa on the situation up here. And also, Minister Chrystia Freeland said today that this had a huge economic impact. It had security threats. It was blocking a huge swath of the nation's capital. So why did this not rise to the level? And what do you think of the fact that the federal government will appeal here likely?
So, a few things. Economic harm is not a part of the threshold of the legislation, and that's very clear in the statute itself. The Emergencies Act can only be invoked when there is a threat to the security of Canada. And that's a defined term in the legislation that's imported from another piece of legislation, the CBC Act. And the part that's relevant for us requires that there be a national emergency with a threat of or use of serious violence and without the ability to be solved under existing law. There's nowhere in that definition that economic harm meets that threshold. Now, Justice Mosley, in his decision, he acknowledges that there was economic harm. Of course there was economic harm. There was a blockade at the border. Ultimately, that was resolved using the criminal law. In Alberta, they simply used the existing criminal code. So clearly it could be resolved under existing law. But on the threshold being economic harm, which is this kind of bizarre gaslighting term that we're hearing the Minister of Finance keep using or the Deputy Prime Minister keep using in justifying their decision to appeal, it's just not part of the threshold. Think what that would mean for our democracy if economic harm allowed the government to create new criminal law by executive order. It would mean that labor disruptions, labor strikes, which are intended to cause economic harm, would meet that threshold. That's very, very clearly not what the drafters of this piece of legislation intended in the 1980s when they debated it. And this is all considered by Justice Mosley in the decision itself. He talks about how that there was an intention to import the CBC Act definition of threat to the security of Canada into that legislation because it had already been thoroughly debated by Parliament, had recently been passed, and people were familiar with this standard. So to now go out around and try and shift and meld this standard to fit into the convenient threshold that this government wants to apply, that's just not how the law works. It was unjustified.
Let me just put the last word to you, Yasser, with a political lens on all of this. I mean, the Liberal Party right now is not doing well in the polls. Do they want to be fighting this battle still? Wouldn't it be politically astute to not appeal this and just kind of put this chapter behind?
I would welcome that.
No, listen, this is a very important piece of legislation. The decision taken by the government was an important decision, and I supported that decision. I continue to do so, and I'm glad that the government is appealing the decision. But I think politically, I can tell you from my community's perspective, from Ottawa's perspective, what's a big challenge has been that you had the leader of the Conservative Party now, Pierre Poilievre, at that time, using the convoy for his own political gain, getting out there, using those protesters as opposed to uniting Canadians, as opposed to bringing people together. He used it as a way to launch his campaign, to collect names, to raise money. I think that is the kind of division we cannot afford in times of crisis. We expect our leaders to come together to make sure that our citizens are safe, that our businesses are safe, and country is above everything. And what we saw from Pierre Poilievre was absolutely the opposite, which makes him not worthy of being leader of a political party or a country.
Listen, I know that both of you guys are on opposite sides of this, but appreciate you coming together to have this conversation, an important conversation here on Canada Tonight. That is Christine Van Geyn, the litigation director at the Canadian Constitution Foundation, and Yasser Naqvi, MP for Ottawa Centre.
Thank you.
Well, the Emergencies Act ruling played out over the third and final day of the federal government's cabinet retreat in Montreal. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his ministers focused on the upcoming U.S. elections and the possibility of Donald Trump returning to the White House. Trudeau says he has formed a working group to put strategies into place to make sure that relations and cross-border trade are maintained under a second Trump administration if it happens. That group, being dubbed Team Canada, is made up of Industry Minister Francois-Philippe Champagne, Trade Minister Mary Ng, and Canada's Ambassador to the United States, Kristen Hillman. The federal NDP is also gathered this week ahead of the return to Parliament. The party is holding a caucus retreat starting today in Edmonton, Alberta. They will be discussing election strategy and ways New Democrats can take on Conservatives. The party is also looking at its supply and confidence deal with the Liberals and pushing a national pharmacare program through Parliament. All right, well, most polls have just closed in New Hampshire this hour. Voters cast their ballot for the Republican candidate in the race for the nomination, and it's down, as we have told you, to Donald Trump and Nikki Haley.
I'm not going to talk about an obituary just because y'all think we have to talk about it. I'm going to talk about running the tape and saving this country. I think we have to do it. I'm a fighter. I work hard. And I do it because I love this country.
Is she a threat to you?
No, and I don't care if she says it. Let her do whatever she wants. It doesn't matter. I can just say that there's never been a movement like this. Make America great again. In the history of our country.
Okay, Katie Simpson, just outside Trump's election watch party live there. So, Katie, Nikki Haley saying she's not ready to write her obituary. Donald Trump saying he doesn't care. He's on the path to victory. Tell us what the scene is there and what's the scene like tonight in New Hampshire.
Let me get out of the way here. I'm going to show you the lineup behind me. We started seeing people line up. This is to get into the Donald Trump results watch party. And I want to say there has been a steady line here for a good 3 hours now, people lining up to get in, hundreds of people. And I have to say, we saw people lining up to get into a Nikki Haley event yesterday. It wasn't what we're seeing here today. The poll suggests that Donald Trump still has quite an advantage over Nikki Haley, the former UN ambassador here in New Hampshire. But we're going to start to get some results relatively soon now that most of the polls in New Hampshire are closing. Some polls are open until 8 o'clock Eastern time. Now, we were chatting with people who gathered here to come see Donald Trump. Their minds have made up. They've cast their ballots for Donald Trump. They want to see him not just be the presidential nominee for the Republican Party, but they want to see him head right back to the White House. And I asked them, is there anything at any point in their support for Donald Trump that has led them to either question or possibly pause their support? And the resounding answer I heard from everyone I spoke with here at this rally, they said they've never had a chance, never had a moment where they doubted their support for Donald Trump.
Because he's honest and straightforward, and I met him in 2016. I formulated my own opinion of him. He's a scholar and a gentleman.
He's going to make America great again. The finances, this country's safety. It's a mess right now. I mean, you're blind if you can't see that the country's a mess right now, and he's the only guy that can fix it.
I'm a small business, and when he came down the escalator in 2015, I was in, because I want somebody who signs the front of a business check, and I know what it's like to pay payroll, and I wanted a businessman to be president.
I asked repeatedly about what people thought about the criminal charges. Donald Trump is facing more than 90 criminal charges, and whether that gave anyone pause. And again, the answer was no. The vast majority of people here repeating some of the points that Donald Trump himself has made. They believe that the criminal charges against Donald Trump are part of a weaponized justice system by Joe Biden, and they believe that Joe Biden is trying to target his main political opponent heading into the 2024 election.
Yeah, that's exactly what Lara Trump told me here on Canada Tonight, the former president's daughter-in-law. And she also alluded, Katie, to the fact that Trump might have his pick for VP already, but is not letting anybody know. You actually talked to somebody who potentially could be that person.
Yeah, so here in this area, we've seen them bring in some VIPs ahead of the watch party. We saw Eric Trump, the president's son, come in. We saw Carrie Lake, who ran for be the Republican governor of Arizona. She lost that election. And then we also saw Vivek Ramaswamy. He decided to suspend his presidential election campaign after the Iowa caucuses. He placed a distant fourth, and he immediately endorsed Donald Trump. And there has been speculation, some talk here in the United States, that perhaps Vivek Ramaswamy would be a good candidate for Donald Trump's pick for VP, that he's a part of the Trump world, he speaks to the base, and that he is liked here. And so as he passed by, sort of greeting people along the line here, we asked him about something that relates to Canada. During the election campaign, he had said that there needs to be a northern border wall because of concerns about northern border security. Here's what he had to say.
Back.
Do you think Donald Trump should build a border wall with Canada? I'm a Canadian reporter.
I think that we need to have border security on both borders. Top priority is the southern border. That's the answer.
Is that, hold on, Mr. Santos, is that, Mr. Santos, are you here for the Donald Trump? Okay, we're live right now on Canadian TV. Can I ask you why you're here right now?
Well, I support President Trump, always have, always will.
And so why did you decide to come out tonight?
It's a 3-hour drive.
And so how has life been since you left Congress?
Amazing without you guys following me.
Is this your first major public event that you've been out to?
No, not at all.
Does Donald Trump know that you have his endorsement?
I was the first New Yorker to endorse him when I got elected.
Has he responded to that?
I don't know. I have paid attention. I support him. I don't need his attention. He's busy running for president. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we just ran into former U.S. Congressman George Santos, who was expelled by members of Congress, and you can see there's now a crowd forming around him. And look, they selfies. There's people are getting in there, get selfies. Oh, we're gonna have to get to the side here. We're gonna get in the way. But yeah, so George Santos, the disgraced former Republican congressman who was expelled after facing numerous criminal charges related to campaign expenses, and is now going through the legal system here in the United States. And hold on, there might be some more VIPs coming. Hold on one second. No, I think we're okay. So Travis.
Yeah.
There you go. No, there's no more
indeed.
VIPs coming. I'm looking people with
Okay,
there we go.
we'll just stick with you for a sec here to see if
So there we go.
There we go indeed. Yeah, I appreciate you coming on. You talked to Vivek Ramaswamy, George Santos, quite the scene there tonight. Let's just stick with you. Is anybody else coming around right now, Katie?
No, not that I see just yet, but yeah, that you never know who you're going to see at a Trump rally, and you sort of just have to be, or any political rally, really, honestly, you just sort of have to have some situational awareness and always have a stick mic so that you can go and talk to people. But that's more for a reporter than anyone else. I don't see anyone else coming, but yeah, George Santos, disgraced Republican former congressman who was booted out by his colleagues through an expenses scandal. He lied intensely about his resume to try and, for his political purposes, for political gain. It was uncovered. The web of lies were incredibly intense. And he is now being sort of asked for selfies here in this line, giving us a couple of quick comments. Hold on, more people are coming in, Travis. Okay, I don't recognize anybody just yet, but
and of course
yeah,
he's
so
on
it's
Cameo as well right now.
It's the scene here.
Yeah, exactly. It is the scene.
Making
indeed.
hundreds of thousands of dollars. He says, but remember, that's what he says, and we know that there's been a history of lies. There's lies, just straight up.
Straight up. But Katie, this is why we have you there, because our Katie Simpson knows how to get the gets, and that is what she's doing tonight. Stay in touch with us and come back anytime you've got another George Santos or Vivek Ramaswamy. That is our Katie Simpson in New Hampshire. She's going to be with us throughout the night here on Canada Tonight Live as results come in and that watch party gets underway for the Republican primary. Okay, well, let's talk about what's coming up later on Canada Tonight. We are going to meet at the intersection with our panelists to dig into the latest news. And amongst our guests, former White House press secretary under President Trump, Sean Spicer. Still to come, also, we are following a deadly helicopter crash in northern BC. 3 people are dead, 4 injured. Our breaking news reporter, Sarah Galashan, joins us in 10 minutes from British Columbia. Plus, we take you to the Northwest Territories. The RCMP, the Canadian Rangers, and the Royal Canadian Air Force all responded to a report of a lost contact that is, with an aircraft outside of Fort Smith. We'll have a live update with Juanita Taylor. But coming up right after the break, our Canada Tonight Spotlight.
I'm Connor McDavid.
Jason Priestley here. Hey, what's up? It's George Stroumboulopoulos here.
We're the kids in the hall.
I'm Avril Lavigne.
I'm Tantoo Cardinal. My interview with Travis coming up.
Well, Killers of the Flower Moon, it received 10 Oscar nominations today, including the first time a Native American woman was nominated for Best Actress, Lily Gladstone. Well, also in this movie is Canadian actress Tantoo Cardinal, who blazed a trail as one of the most widely recognized First Nation actors of her generation. She is in the spotlight tonight. We talked to her at Canada's Walk of Fame induction in December. Joining me now, Tantoo Cardinal. Hi there.
Hi there.
So all these years past Anzac, Alberta. You think you'd be here?
Yes, I left Anzac a long time ago.
Yeah.
It's a life of constant movement. With the winds, I say. I live on the winds.
That wind has filled the sails of an incredible journey, a career in film and television that has taken her from Anzac, Alberta to Hollywood and back. She's been appointed to the Order of Canada and now is among those on Canada's Walk of Fame. Cardinal started in the 1970s in lesser-known, often Canadian-made films. Then, in 1990, a breakout role that would change the trajectory of her life came along. In the Oscar-winning film Dances with Wolves, she starred alongside Kevin Costner and Graham Greene. The movie, about a Civil War soldier and his friendship with the Sioux band, attempted to flip the script and correct Hollywood's negative portrayal of Indigenous characters. Something, she says, is work that continues to this day.
I got involved for the purposes of trying to straighten out some of the stories that were being told about us.
What do you mean by that?
That we've been maligned horrendously in history. That we're the dumb people, that we're the ones that had to be removed. We survived genocide and colonialism. And those are not easy things. And we're still carrying that. We're still carrying that.
Yeah.
So stories are important to change in people's minds and eventually work its way to the heart.
How have you watched the evolution of Indigenous characters?
It's been slow, sometimes very painfully slow, especially when it comes to women. And that's an issue with this society.
Truth is a value Cardinal holds on to firmly. Her reaction when asked about the recent string of prominent individuals claiming to have Indigenous heritage that is now questioned was visceral.
I loathe these people.
You loathe these people?
I loathe them. I want them to go away. I want them to go to their own history and to their own culture, to their own ancestors, and go there. Go spend all their richness, all their incredible gifts that they have, that they can come and reap our fields. You know, go to your own world. Go there and be useful.
We're going to pause the conversation there, but we'll have more of our spotlight conversation with Tantoo Cardinal later on in the program, and she talks about her former friend, Buffy St. Marie. Well, up ahead, details about that deadly helicopter crash in British Columbia. 4 survivors are in hospital right now, 2 of them in critical condition. Plus, we're finding out more about a plane crash in the Northwest Territories where medics are on alert to deal with a mass casualty. You're watching Canada Tonight. Stay with us.
I don't want to minimize the gravity of the actions we took. Neither do I want to minimize the gravity of the threat Canada faced.
All right, 9:41 in Toronto right now, 4:41 in Vancouver. Let's revisit our top story that we're tracking tonight. That is that a federal court has ruled the government's decision to invoke the Emergencies Act during the weeks-long 2022 convoy. Well, that was unreasonable. The case was brought forward by the Canadian Civil Liberties Association and other groups, and they argued that Ottawa ushered in these measures without sound statutory regulations and on statutory grounds. The government says they are going to appeal the decision. We're also tracking the latest developments out of New Hampshire with our Katie Simpson, who, as you know, is live there. We'll bring you that as it comes in. But we also have new details at this hour about a fatal helicopter crash in northern British Columbia. The RCMP is investigating after 3 people were killed in a remote area while on a skiing tour. 4 others are in hospital with serious injuries. Our Sarah Galashan has been tracking this story from Vancouver and will now take us through the latest. Good evening to you, Sarah.
Hey, Travis. Here's what we know so far. Right now, we know that this was a Koala Augusta A119 helicopter. It was one of a number that were contracted to the Northern Escape heli-skiing operation by a Kelowna company called Skyline. Northern Escape had 3 helicopters that were in the air late yesterday afternoon. What we're told is that they were about 30 kilometers north of Terrace, British Columbia. And we have a map just to show you just how remote of an area it is that we are talking about here. This was late yesterday afternoon. The company says that the pilot was making regularly scheduled check-ins with dispatch, and nothing seemed amiss. And then they got a call from on board that helicopter from one of the guests using a guest radio saying that the helicopter had gone down. They said that it crashed into the side of a mountain near the peak at an approximate elevation of 2,000 meters. Now, at that point, the other 2 helicopters circled back, met to the crash site. They were able to transport the 4 who were on board who had been injured, meeting up with awaiting ambulances, and they were taken then to hospital. But there were 3 on board who died of their injuries in that helicopter crash. And Northern Escape heli-skiing, the operator, talked to the media about that. Take a listen.
It's a tough time for us right now. The guests who ski with us and the staff who work with us each season are very much our family. It's impossible to put into words the profound grief and sorrow that our guests and staff share right now.
What do we know about the victims?
Yeah, well, the company's not releasing their names at this point, but CBC News has confirmed that 2 of the 3 who died were Italian tourists who were either worked in or were associated with sportswear brands in Italy. There they are. That is Heiner Oberhoch and Andreas Widman. Italy's deputy prime minister actually expressing condolences on social media to the families of both of those men, given this helicopter crash that happened in northern BC. As for the 4 who were injured, as I say, they were initially taken to a hospital that was local to Terrace. They've since been transported south to receive more care. 2 of them right now are considered to be in critical condition still, the other 2 in serious condition, Travis.
And there, of course, can be risks, inherent risks with heli-skiing adventures. And this tragedy is not the first, Sarah?
Oh, no. I mean, certainly we know this is a not only very expensive adventure to take, but it is also certainly a risky one. And you just have to look to past seasons and stories that have been reported by media, including CBC, about those who have died engaging in this kind of adventure. Those risks can't be eliminated, we're told, by heli-ski operators. And we're also told by this company that the tourists who were on board this helicopter that went down, this wasn't the first heli-ski that they had engaged in, that they had done this before, that they were aware of the risks. But to be fair, risks associated with heli-skiing often, or more often, have to do with avalanche or unstable snowpack. What we're talking about here is a helicopter crash. And here's what was said at that media briefing about that.
Our pilots are highly skilled, highly trained pilots, handpicked to fly with us. They do a tremendous amount of training and preparation to come here. And when they get here, they go through more training with us. Both our guides and our pilots working together.
Travis, the short of it is, he says that they simply don't know what happened yesterday afternoon that caused that helicopter to crash into the mountain, but the Transportation Safety Board is on site, is investigating, and they'll await that report.
Okay, a lot of questions still remain. Sarah Galashan tracking the story from our Vancouver newsroom. Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah. You bet.
So from Vancouver, we now head to the Northwest Territories, and emergency officials there launched a search today after a plane went down in the Fort Smith area. The community is located along the border with Alberta. Our Juanita Taylor joins us now live from Rankin Inlet with more on this. Good evening to you, Juanita. What do we know about this crash?
Well, Travis, it's a tragedy that, has the worst outcome that anybody in the Northwest Territories would have hoped for. The Northwest Territories Chief Coroner has confirmed tonight that there are a number of deaths resulting from this crash, but Garth Eggenberger isn't releasing any more information until all of the next of kin have been notified. The shocking announcement we just received in the past hour confirms what the Northwest Territories Health and Social Services Authority alluded to in a public notice that they released earlier today, Travis, that the Fort Smith Health Center activated its mass casualty protocol just before 9 o'clock this morning. So, Travis, there are no details yet as to the exact number of casualties or survivors, nor do we have any information as to what happened that caused this tragedy. Now, the town of Fort Smith did release a post on its Facebook page today around 9:20 this morning, saying that they were responding to an aviation incident, telling residents to stay away from the area so that emergency personnel can get to do what they need to do. And that included the RCMP, ambulances, and fire trucks. Now, Travis, a barricade was also set up close to the airport so that anyone who was not authorized to go there didn't. We also heard from the Joint Rescue Coordination Center in Trenton that they were assisting in this response, and that initiated 2 Hercules airplanes, a Twin Otter, and the Canadian Rangers. And in fact, Travis, it was the Canadian Rangers who found the crashed airplane, and it happened near Slave River, about west of Fort Smith. Search and rescue technicians equipped with survival and medical equipment were then parachuted to the crash site, and the Transportation Safety Board is now heading to the site to begin its investigation.
Okay, our Juanita Taylor tracking the story live from Rankin Inlet. Our thanks to you this evening. The courtroom was full for the third day of the sentencing of the hearing of the man who killed 4 members of a Muslim family in London, Ontario. 23-year-old Nathaniel Veltman hit the Afzal Yousal family with his truck while they were out for a walk in June of 2021. Today, the judge heard arguments on whether the attack amounted to an act of terrorism. Veltman was found guilty, that is, in November on 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder. Today, lawyers made submissions to the court on what sentence he should be given for the attempted murder conviction. Veltman addressed the court late this afternoon. He expressed regret and apologized to the family. Now, a family spokesperson had this reaction to Veltman's remarks.
It would be a failure for anyone to believe that this was an apology. It is one more strategy in a series of ploys that has not stopped for 2.5 years. It comes from a convicted killer who has had ample opportunity to confess. If he truly was sorry, we would never have been here for this needless trial.
The judge is due to sentence Veltman and rule on the terrorism issue on February 22nd. We're back on Canada Tonight in just a moment. Welcome back to Canada Tonight. Hamas has rejected Israel's proposed 2-month ceasefire. Israel says it's willing to trade Palestinian prisoners, including top Hamas officials, for hostages being held in Gaza. All this comes as Israel mourns its single deadliest day of fighting since the war started in October. Sasha Petrusik has the latest.
In the reign of Tel Aviv, they marched and mourned. In Jerusalem, they remembered a 23-year-old reservist with prayers and honors. He died on a dangerous mission with no chance to tell his family.
We didn't know he went in. We didn't know we were supposed to worry about him.
After the deadliest day of conflict for Israel, 24 soldiers were buried today. 21 of them died in a single incident just inside the border with Gaza when mines they were setting exploded, hit by a Hamas rocket. I grieve for every one of them in this unjust war, says Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, a war he vows to continue until total victory. In previous conflicts, high Israeli casualties have turned the public against wars. Less so now, it seems.
That's horrible. That's horrendous. It's terrible. You know, it's our sons, it's our brothers. It's terrible. But we got to do what we got to do so that October 7th doesn't happen again.
Allahu Akbar. There was grieving in Gaza too, as Palestinian families buried their dead on the grounds of a hospital. It's too dangerous to use cemeteries. Southern Gaza is the scene of heavy fighting, with almost 2 million displaced Palestinians caught with nowhere to hide. With Qatar mediating, talks continue, looking for a ceasefire and a release of Israeli hostages held in Gaza.
I can't give you odds on if and when we'll be able to get there, but the conversations are very sober and serious about trying to get another hostage deal in place.
Complicated by Hamas's insistence on a permanent ceasefire before anyone is released, and Israel's new bottom line that a ceasefire is impossible while Hamas remains in power. Sasha Petrusik, CBC News, Toronto.
Well, we have a lot more ahead on Canada Tonight, including our intersection panel. We'll discuss the latest on the federal government's use of the Emergencies Act, and the first results are coming in from New Hampshire. Our Katie Simpson is there. That is a live look of New Hampshire at this hour. We will get the very latest for you right after the break. Stick with us. It is 8 o'clock in Windsor, 7 o'clock in Regina, and 5 o'clock in Victoria. This is Canada Tonight. A decisive decision. A federal judge says the Liberal government's use of the Emergencies Act to clear convoy protesters was unreasonable and infringed on protesters' charter rights. Showdown in New Hampshire. Donald Trump faces off with Nikki Haley in the Granite State. We'll have all the latest details. And a spectacular show. Darius Mohamedi shows us new out-of-this-world images that are straight from the Hubble telescope. But let's begin in Ottawa. That is where the federal government once again finds itself having to defend its use of the Emergencies Act. A federal court found the government's decision to invoke the act during the 2022 convoy protests in Ottawa was unreasonable.
It was a hard decision to take. We took it very seriously. It was the necessary thing to do. I remain, and we remain, convinced of that.
Today's ruling is the result of a case brought forward by the Canadian Civil Liberties Association and other groups. They argued Ottawa ushered in the measures without sound statutory grounds. A federal court Justice Richard Mosley agreed, ruling that the protest did not meet the legal threshold for a national emergency. The CBC's Korea Rowan has the latest.
Okay, so in terms of the highlights, his reasoning for his conclusion that the justice is unreasonable, unjustified, looking specifically at Section 2B of the Charter of Rights, which is freedom of expression, and Section 8, which is about search and seizure. I'm going to read part of the decision or conclusion in which basically Judge Mosley sums it all up, saying, I have concluded that the decision to issue the proclamation does not bear the hallmarks of reasonableness, justification, transparency, and intelligibility, and was not justified in relation to the relevant factual and legal constraints that were required to be taken into consideration. So that's his conclusion. And then, of course, most of these 200 pages are his reasoning for how he got there. He did say that Cabinet had the authority to make this decision. It just made the wrong decision, that it was no national emergency, the potential for serious violence, not enough of a reason to support the conclusion that the convoy created what he called a critical, urgent, and temporary situation that was national in scope. It was not national in scope, he says. And it's also not a situation that couldn't have been effectively dealt with under other laws in Canada, except perhaps here in Ottawa. He does understand, he says, that the situation here was very difficult, quite different from what happened in other parts of the country, and that perhaps the declaration could have been tailored in that way to deal just with Ottawa or just with Ontario. He also talked quite a bit about Section 8, as I said, of the Charter, this but search and seizure, because he said there was really the measure to freeze people's bank accounts while understanding the rationale behind it, Travis, says that it was done in such a way that did not minimally impair people. It caught too many people up in its web and had too much of an impact, too broad an impact, and that there was no effort to find a solution to the problems that it caused.
Okay, so obviously the ruling pretty deep, Karina. We're going to get a lot of reaction to this, including from Yasser Naqvi, who is the MP for Ottawa Centre, where this occupation took place, and also reaction from Christine Van Geyn, who was part of a group who brought this actually to federal court. But what other reaction are we hearing so far?
Well, the cabinet ministers who were at the table came out today. You heard earlier, of course, Chrystia Freeland saying that they wouldn't change their mind, that they recall that day, those weeks, and that they would have made the same decision. And they were quite quick to say they would decide that they've decided that they will appeal. So have a listen to the Justice Minister and what he had to say on that front.
We also know that a member of the Court of Appeal, Justice Rouleau, conducted a very public, comprehensive and transparent investigation into the reasonableness of the government's decision. That decision stands at odds with the decision that was rendered today. I think that is important, and that also informs our decision and our basis upon which we will proceed to an appeal.
We also heard from one of the convoy organizers, not one that is necessarily that well known in terms of testimony at the Rouleau Commission, but nevertheless saying that she's surprised by the ruling and wonders what it will actually mean. Have a listen.
Will there be consequence for freezing bank accounts of Canadian citizens who were doing nothing wrong? Will there be consequence for Trudeau, Freeland, and Mendocino? That's yet to play out, but it's nice to see the pendulum swing in our favor for once.
Now, there is some nuance in this ruling, Travis, in that Judge Mosley, he says that if he had been at the cabinet table in that moment, he may have also made the same decision to invoke the Emergencies Act. So there is some room there and sympathy there in terms of understanding, where heads were at in that moment and at that time. Whether that means that an appeal by the federal government will be successful or not, that remains to be seen. But clearly the government ready to appeal and wanting to get some clarity exactly on what the rules around the Emergency Act should be.
Okay, Karina, appreciate it. I know it's been a long day in Ottawa for you with all this breaking news today. Thank you for that. Let's stay on this topic and bring in our intersection panel right now. We're joined by Kyle Jacobs, Associate Principal with Navigator, and Omar Khan, who is a political strategist. So our first topic is what Karina was just talking about, the use of the Emergencies Act. Let me get your perspective on this, Omar. I know you are a Liberal strategist. Do you think that this was the right decision here, and what do you think about this ruling?
Well, look, we have to respect the independence of the courts, and I think the Minister of Justice and Attorney General indicated today that they will be seeking to appeal. I think it's important to take everybody back, to take the viewers back to what was happening in Ottawa, what was happening at the Coots border crossing in Alberta, and what was happening at the Canada-U.S. border crossing in Windsor. This was a major national event that was potentially impacting not just the functioning of our national capital, but key sectors of our economy. And you also have to understand that back at that time, the mayor of Ottawa, the chief of police of the city of Ottawa, and eventually the premier of Ontario all agreed with this decision. So, I think it's good that the government is going to be taking this forward for appeal. We'll see how that process plays out. But at the end of the day, the actions taken under invoking of the Emergencies Act actually ended this crisis. The borders were cleared up, and our national capital was cleared up.
Okay, let me get Kyle to get his opinion on this. Is the reason the protest ended because of the Emergencies Act? And what about Omar's points there that they basically shut down the nation's capital for a very long time, and this action was needed?
Well, Travis, great to be here, but let's start with the facts. Today, a federal court found that Justin Trudeau, by invoking the Emergency Act, violated the rule of law. To be clear, Justin Trudeau acted illegally. And this is a major blow for the Trudeau government, a government currently reeling from record low polling. And whether or not you agree with the actions of the Freedom Convoy, this ruling shows that no politician, including Justin Trudeau, is above the rule of law.
So, okay, let's talk about the political optics here, the strategy, and what the fallout potentially could be for the Liberal government. And I asked Yasser Naqvi this last hour, Omar, if the government really wants to be re-litigating this, quite literally right now, is this good when you look at the polls right now and where the Liberals are at?
Look, I think on issues that are impacting our country's ability to trade and are potentially impacting our country's ability to actually function in its own national capital, I think we got to put partisanship aside. And that is what Premier Ford did, by the way.
Is that actually realistically going to happen, though, Omar? To put partisanship aside?
I think it's important, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's one of the reasons why Premier Ford subsequently came out and said that he agreed with the decision. But look, at the end of the day, I don't think there's a ton of sympathy across Canada for the actions of the convoy protesters. I think everyone understands that everyone, including people who are upset with vaccine mandates, have the right to protest. There are places that are designated for these types of protests. I don't understand why they couldn't have just gone on the lawns of Parliament Hill and protested like everybody else does. For some reason, they felt that they needed to shut down the national capital. And others felt that they needed to shut down various border crossings. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I think most Canadians agree that the government took an appropriate decision. We'll see how it plays out in the courts, right? That's why we have an independent court system. I have no doubt that Mr. Virani, the Attorney General and Justice Minister, is going to make a strong case, and we'll see how it goes. But, we have to remember, the Mayor of Ottawa, the Chief of Police of Ottawa, and the Premier of Ontario have all said that they've agreed with this decision.
Okay, so Kyle, politically for the Leader of the Opposition, Pierre Poilievre, if this is still in the news cycle, if this is still in the courts, is that an advantage for him? And do you think that he is going to be taking advantage of that situation and bringing us back to 2022?
Listen, let's look at the reality on the ground. The federal government froze bank accounts without court orders, without even laying criminal charges. That is an affront to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in this country. Canadians want a prime minister that will unite Canadians and not divide them. That's clear that Justin Trudeau is not that prime minister. My mother said earlier this afternoon, we don't live in Russia. And I think this affront to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms is scary, and it's something that can't be allowed to happen.
I mean, isn't that a bit of hyperbole, though, comparing it to Russia?
Listen, you can't violate the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. This isn't about what the Mayor of Ottawa said. This isn't about what Premier Ford said. This is about the actions the Prime Minister took, to silence people that disagreed with his policies.
Okay, Omar, let me get you to respond to that.
Look, obviously, I am a liberal, so I grew up with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. I'm a charter baby.
Yeah.
So obviously, I'm not advocating, nor do I think or is anyone in the government advocating abrogating the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. We have a process. We have a court process. Let's respect that process. At the end of the day, the government's going to abide by the decision. But it's also important to point out, I think I think Minister Virani also pointed this out, that Justice Rouleau also took a look at this, took a very deep look at this, and came to a different conclusion than the court did today. So we'll see how this plays out. We have an independent court system, thank God. That is one reason why we are not Russia. And we'll see how this plays out over the next coming days, weeks, and months.
Okay, Kyle, and how do you think it is going to play out in terms of what we are going to be seeing debated in the House? Because as the House is coming back.
Yes.
Is this going to be brought up on the floor?
Absolutely, it'll be brought up on the floor. And I think politically, it strengthens Poilievre's argument that Justin Trudeau overreached and that this was another attempt for him to divide Canadians.
I mean, it does to, Omar, it goes back to divisions, right? I mean, that was a point in time where there was a lot of divisions in this country. To Kyle's point, would you want to have that, out there still? Is it not further dividing the country if we are still debating this in the public discourse?
I think it's important for a government that believes that they took an appropriate action, a constitutional action at the request of the Mayor of Ottawa and the Chief of Police of Ottawa, to take this forward. It's a position that's been backed up by Justice Rouleau, and the government has every right to take this forward and to appeal the decision. And we'll see how that plays out. Like I said, at the end of the day, I do agree. Canadians need to come together on this. There were legitimate disagreements, public policy disagreements,
right,
on the vaccine mandates. People have the right to protest, but we can't have a situation in this country where one group that doesn't agree with an action of a democratically elected government can shut down the national capital and vital border crossings.
Okay, well, Kyle, let me ask you because it's easy to criticize the decisions that were happening, but we have to remember as well, there was a lot going on in Ottawa. I was on the ground there, as I mentioned. A lot was happening at that time. The federal government was involved. There were multiple police units involved as well. If the Conservative Party had been in power at that time, how do you think that they would have handled the situation differently?
Listen, we're here to talk today about what Justin Trudeau did. And what he did is he violated the charter rights of Canadians, people he didn't agree with.
All right. Okay, we'll leave it there. Omar Khan, Kyle Jacobs.
The courts will decide.
The courts will decide.
Certainly.
Okay. Clearly, there's disagreement there, but we are going to meet back at the intersection next after the break. Kyle's going to stick with us. Omar, we will see you again here on the intersection. And coming up, we are going to be talking about New Hampshire. We'll head to the United States, and we got some breaking news right now. The Associated Press is declaring Donald Trump the winner of the New Hampshire primary. U.S. networks, however, say it is too early to call. Our Katie Simpson is outside Trump's election watch party. Katie, let's go live to you right now. Before we head to break, actually, what are you hearing there?
Well, because it's just the Associated Press so far, there's no sort of like loud surge of reaction. What we did see just a short time ago, though, was a number of special forces. They dress like special forces commandos, but as part of Donald Trump's security detail. We just saw them sort of move through this area. So it suggests to me that perhaps Donald Trump is in the building. I can't confirm that, but it would strongly suggest, given the level of security that he requires being a former president and the Secret Service detail that he does get. But you know, the rest of the American television networks have not called it just yet, but Trump was widely expected to win this contest. It's now determining just by what the margin is going to be and how big this victory is and what it means for Nikki Haley's campaign, whether that she can demonstrate that she remains competitive with Donald Trump or whether her donations dry up and it's time to pack it in. Here at this event, there was a lineup to get into it that lasted for about a good 2.5, 3 hours of people just streaming into the event that's happening just behind me. And I talked with Trump supporters and I asked them at any point in their support for Donald Trump, is there anything that would lead them to question or pause or reconsider their support for Donald Trump? And every single person I spoke to said they've never had any doubts about their support for Trump.
Because he's honest and straightforward, and I met him in 2016. I formulated my own opinion of him. He's a scholar and a gentleman.
He's going to make America great again. The finances, the safety, this country's safety. It's a mess right now. I mean, you're blind if you can't see that the country's a mess right now, and he's the only guy that can fix it.
I'm a small business, and when he came down the escalator in 2015, I was in. Because I want somebody who signs the front of a business check. And I know what it's like to pay payroll, and I wanted a businessman to be president.
So if you're looking for any sort of insight into what the Donald Trump base is thinking, that's it. I also asked a number of times, you know, whether the criminal charges that Donald Trump is facing, more than 90 criminal charges, whether that has any influence on their support. And every single person I asked, I got the same or similar answers back. They repeated a lot of the points that Donald Trump has made in his rallies, claiming that the justice system has been weaponized against him, and they see this as an attack by the Biden administration onto Donald Trump because he's doing well in the polls.
And Katie, there have been a lot of big names that you have been seeing there tonight, including live on air with us. Tell us who is there.
You never know who you're going to bump into at a political rally, and that is just, you just have to keep your eyes open kind of thing. So as we were sort of talking with people in the crowd, we saw Vivek Ramaswamy. He, of course, was running to be a Republican presidential nominee. He dropped out after a disappointing finish in Iowa. And we saw him in the line, and very briefly got to throw him a question. During the election campaign, he had said that he thinks something that needs to happen in the U.S., that they need a northern border wall with Canada. So I asked him about that.
You're back.
Do you think Donald Trump should build a border wall with Canada? I'm a Canadian reporter.
I think that we need to have border security on both borders. Top priority is the southern border. That's the answer.
And so a short time after that, we were here in line and Travis, we were having our conversation here. And out of the corner of my eye, I spot a very recognizable face, and that would be former or disgraced former Congressman George Santos.
Yeah.
And we asked him why he was here. Can I ask you why you're here right now?
Well, I support President Trump, always have, always will.
And so why did you decide to come out tonight?
It's a 3-hour drive.
And so how has life been since you left Congress?
Amazing without you guys following me.
Is this your first major public event that you've been out to?
No, not at all.
Does Donald Trump know that you have his endorsement?
I was the first New Yorker to endorse him when I got elected.
Has he responded to that?
I don't know. I haven't paid attention. I support him. I don't need his attention. He's busy running for president.
George Santos, of course, was expelled from Congress because of the web of lies he told for political gain and the the criminal charges he's facing related to his campaign. Now, do I wish I'd asked him, you know, did he regret his lies? I wish I'd asked him that, and I did not ask him that in the moment. But as he actually headed into the venue, he was surrounded by people who were asking for selfies. So he went on the record endorsing Trump, but he'd done that before. That's not new there. But you never know who you're going to see at a Trump rally. But I was sort of trying to get at whether Donald Trump even wants his endorsement, given his sort of disgraced history that happened here.
And as you said, Katie, that is why you always have to have a stick mic, as you do. We're just hearing as well that NBC has called Donald Trump in this as well. Do you, and CNN right now, I'm told by Thorsten, my producer upstairs, do you see a situation where Nikki Haley drops out tonight? Because, you know, we played a clip from her earlier and she said, listen, I'm not writing my obituary yet. But what's the road ahead for Nikki Haley if she loses here tonight, as all the American... Okay, actually, you know what? Pause on that conversation. Nikki Haley is speaking. Let's go to that live.
Say that the way they raised me, to know that we lived in the best country in the world, but to also know that the best way you appreciate your blessings is to give back. Thank you, Mom and Dad. I love you so much. To my siblings, to my in-laws, to everybody back at home, to Vicki for helping me take care of Mom and Dad. Thank you for that. You know, I will tell you, it feels like it's been a lifetime, but it has been almost a year that we've been campaigning in New Hampshire, touching every hand, answering every question, being the last person to leave. And we had the most amazing thing happen is the second that we got the endorsement from Governor Chris Sununu. I mean, a true governor that doesn't stand behind a podium. He shows up at a diner. He shows up at the brewery. He loves the people of New Hampshire. He has been with me every single day at every single event. Chris, I couldn't have done it without you. And I want to thank someone who was with me on day one. He's a patriot. He's a hardcore conservative. And he is my friend, General Don Bolduc. And Sharon, thank you so much. I want to congratulate Donald Trump on his victory tonight. He earned it, and I want to acknowledge that. Now, you've all heard the chatter among the political class. They're falling all over themselves, saying this race is over. Well, I have news for all of them. New Hampshire is first in the nation. It is not the last in the nation. This race is far from over. There are dozens of states left to go. And the next one is my sweet state of South Carolina. At one point in this campaign, there were 14 of us running. And we were at 2% in the polls. Well, I'm a fighter. And I'm scrappy. And now we're the last one standing next to Donald Trump. And today we got close to half of the vote. We still have a ways to go, but we keep moving up. For a lot of people, politics is way too personal. It's not personal for me. I voted for Trump twice. I was proud to serve America in his cabinet. I agree with many of his policies. I decided to run because I'm worried about the future of our country and because it's time to put the negativity and chaos behind us. We have an economy that's crushing middle-class Americans. We have a border that is totally open and dangerous, creating a disaster in our country. Unbelievable! We have We have schools that are failing too many of our children, and we have a world on fire with a war in Europe and the Middle East and a huge and growing threat from China. And then you look at Washington, D.C. We have a Congress that fights about everything and accomplishes nothing. And we have Joe Biden in the White House making one bad decision after another, when he's making any decisions at all. Our country's in a real mess. And the question is, who's going to fix it? With Donald Trump, Republicans have lost almost every competitive election. We lost the Senate. We lost the House. We lost the White House. We lost in 2018. We lost in 2020. And we lost in 2022. The worst kept secret in politics is how badly the Democrats want to run against Donald Trump. They know Trump is the only Republican in the country who Joe Biden can defeat. You can't fix the mess if you don't win an election. A Trump nomination is a Biden win and a Kamala Harris presidency. I defeat Biden handily. With Donald Trump, you have one bout of chaos after another. This court case, that controversy, this tweet, that senior moment. You can't fix Joe Biden's chaos with Republican chaos. The other day, Donald Trump accused me of not providing security at the Capitol on January 6th. Now, I've long called for mental competency tests for politicians over the age of 75. Trump claims he'd do better than me in one of those tests. Maybe he would, maybe he wouldn't. But if he thinks that, then he should have no problem standing on a debate stage with me. Most Americans do not want a rematch between Biden and Trump. The first party to retire its 80-year-old candidate is going to be the party that wins this election. And I think it should be the Republicans that win this election. So our fight is not over, because we have a country to save. In the next 2 months, millions of voters in over 20 states will have their say. We should honor them and allow them to vote. And guess what? In the next 2 months, Joe Biden isn't going to get any younger or any better. We'll have all the time we need to defeat Joe Biden. When we get to South Carolina, Donald Trump's going to have a harder time falsely attacking me. The great people of South Carolina know I cut their taxes. They know I signed the toughest illegal immigration bill in the country. They know we passed voter ID and tort reform and ethics reform, and they know we moved 35,000 people from welfare to work. Every time I've run for office in South Carolina, I've beaten the political establishment. They're lined up against me again. That's no surprise. But South Carolina voters don't want a coronation. They want an election. And we're going to give them one. Because we are just getting started. Thank you for the energy. Thank you for the love, New Hampshire. We're going home to South Carolina.
All right. There you go. You heard it. That's Concord, New Hampshire at this hour. Nikki Haley saying her fight is not over. She is moving forward. We're going to pause for the breaking news here because the breaking news. The breaking news right now is that Donald Trump is the winner in the New Hampshire primary, but Nikki Haley says that she is going to continue in her race towards the White House, taking on the former president in the Republican race. We're going to bring in our panel in just a moment to analyze this, but first I want to see if we can go back to our Katie Simpson, who was on the ground there. And Katie, let me just get your thoughts on Nikki Haley not throwing in the towel just yet.
No, and the way that speech sort of started and thanking her parents, and I thought that, oh, this is headed in one direction that possibly could shape this race. But no, she says she's going to hang in there and she's going to make the case to voters that she can remain competitive in this race and that she can be an alternate candidate to Donald Trump. The question really is, does the Republican Party want an alternate candidate to Donald Trump? He easily won Iowa, the Iowa caucuses, and he won tonight. We're still going to wait to get all the details about what the margin of victory is here in New Hampshire. But Nikki Haley announcing that she is not going to be leaving the race. And actually, a congressman just walked by me. But we're going to see if any other people are leaving this event to see if we can get to any initial reaction if you have time for that. I'm not quite sure if you do. But this is the breaking news that Donald Trump has picked up another win in his quest to be the Republican presidential nominee. Eventually, he wants to return to the White House and take on Joe Biden in the 2024 general election. But this is a big win for Donald Trump. But again, we're still going to wait to see what those margins are going to be. Nikki Haley is really going to try to convince voters and convince donors. American politics is extremely expensive, and if she's going to be able to remain a competitive candidate, she's got to make sure those donations keep coming in. Something that actually Ron DeSantis mentioned in his video where he announced he was suspending his campaign, that he, said that there wasn't a path to the White House, there wasn't a path to victory for him, and part of it had to do with donations and party time, volunteer time. But Travis, I'll send it back to you. People aren't streaming out just yet. Trump hasn't spoken here, so people aren't streaming out of the event.
All right. Well, Katie, yeah, and that's right, because we are expecting to hear from the former president. We're going to stick with Katie. She will be there as that story develops, where she is at that Trump watch party. But right now, we're going to bring in our panel for analysis on this. We're joined by Kyle Jacobs, associate principal at Navigator, and Roland Martin, host and managing editor of the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show. Thanks to both of you for joining us right now. We're waiting for Sean Spicer, the former president's press secretary, for a very short period of time, but a former press secretary nonetheless, to join us in this conversation. So we'll get him hooked up as soon as he's here. But Roland, let me get your thoughts. Nikki Haley says she's going to fight another day.
Of course, because the next one is South Carolina. It only makes sense, but the reality is when she loses in South Carolina, then she'll drop out of the race. The money's not going to be there, and there'll be nothing more embarrassing to be the former governor of South Carolina and to lose. You already have the sitting senators of that state that have endorsed Donald Trump. You've had Congresswoman Nancy Mace endorse Donald Trump. And so South Carolina is going to be her last stand, and is likely to be the last time she's on the national stage as a candidate, because when she loses that state, she'll have no choice but to drop out.
So strategy-wise, let me just stick with you for a second here, Roland. Why stay in there? Why not throw in the towel now? Is it just to save face, or I mean, I'm trying to think of the political reasoning here.
Well, it's very simple. When you, first of all, you've only had 2 states vote. If you actually add the numbers up, and we'll wait for these numbers to come in. Let's say it gets to 70,000, the 50+ thousand in Iowa. That means 120,000 people will have decided the primary for the Republican Party. But it's also going to come down to money. At the end of the day, if you don't have the resources to pay your campaign staff, to do television ads, to do radio ads, if the donors do not see a pathway to victory, then you have no campaign. And if you can't win your home state, she's pushing all chips to the middle. She has to win South Carolina. She can't come close. She has to win her home state. She loses her home state, race is over.
Okay, Kyle, let me bring you in here. Your thoughts on Nikki Haley staying in, and also it seemed like she was taking the gloves off even more than she has already, ramping up her attacks on Donald Trump, specifically around his age and cognitive ability. What did you make?
I think Roland is exactly right there. Nikki Haley, she's all in on this next primary. She's facing some very steep competition from Donald Trump. I must say, though, as a Canadian observer, I am continuously impressed with the enthusiasm that you see both in the audiences and in the candidates themselves when they deliver these speeches. It's something we here up north are a bit enviable of.
And so, you know, Kyle, I'll ask you about the mental competency, the age factor here, and if that is going to catch on with Republican voters, because clearly at this point it hasn't. It's not going to stick, and Roland, as you see, is shaking his head.
It clearly didn't catch on the last election. It clearly hasn't had traction this time around. I don't see why it would make a difference in the next primary.
So then, Roland, why keep making that argument, right? Like, why would Nikki Haley go at that?
Right.
It does seem a little bit below the belt, some would say.
Well, first of all, that's what politics is. But you have to cast doubt.
Yeah.
And Trump has sounded crazy in a lot of these speeches. He absolutely has. And so you want to constantly be casting doubt. And look, you don't know what's going to happen. I mean, look, Trump could take a fall. He could get sick. But you literally have no idea what's going to happen. And so if you're Nikki Haley, you want to stay in as long as you can. So if anything happens to make the case, hey, I'm the one still left standing. But the bottom line is he has a very strong base that they are going to turn out. The Republican Party, they are aligned with Donald Trump. And so I fully expect him to be the nominee. But bottom line is he's going to have some fundamental issues come the fall. That's why you hear Nikki Haley talk about, look, focus on November as well, not just who wins the primary, because we got to win November.
Okay, I want to bring in Sean Spicer. Thank you for joining us, Sean. We've been waiting for you to get hooked up here. Sean Spicer, the former White House press secretary. Let me just get your reaction to these results. Nikki Haley saying that she's going to fight it out, and what we're expecting to hear from the former president, where Katie is right now at that watch party in New Hampshire.
Well, I think, first of all, Roland's right in terms of how this thing is going to play out. The question is, how long does she want to go on? What I thought was interesting is how quick she came out tonight. Normally, you want to wait till you get your results. I think what she's doing, she realizes that what's coming in early are the cities like the Manchesters, Concord, Nashua, the big areas where you're going to get, that are suburbs of Boston, that were going to be more favorable to Haley. And then get out there, tell your supporters, hey, look, we're close, and so I'm going to fight to South Carolina. She didn't want to wait, because my guess is that more results come in from the more rural areas of New Hampshire, from up north and out west. That's not going to benefit her. So she wanted to get out there while the result was as tight as possible and make the case that she should fight on. But at the end of the day, Roland's right. I mean, the donors are going to wake up tomorrow, the supporters, the people who knock on doors, and they're going to say, wait a second, if Donald Trump expands his lead beyond double-digit points tonight, which I think is extremely possible and likely, it's going to be hard for her to make the case to go on. But she's also mistaken. Look, Nevada is actually a state that is coming up. There are several delegates at stake there, and there's a caucus in one of our territories. South Carolina is 31 days away. That's a lot of time, and that means you need to pay for staff and infrastructure and ads to go on. She's really hoping that she can do well there. Roland brought up the endorsements earlier. It's not just the endorsements. Donald Trump is killing her by 30 points there, and I expect that lead to grow. I don't know that she wants to lose in a state she was governor twice for. Is Donald Trump, and I'll ask you, Sean, we had Laura Trump on, the former president's daughter-in-law yesterday, and she was saying that, he may already have he likely has his pick for who he wants as his running mate. Is he even paying attention to this race in the primaries, or is he looking ahead already? It's an interesting question. Having gone through this with him last cycle, I was the chief strategist for the RNC and spent a lot of time up there. He is not one that usually gets too far over his skis. And so I think he teased that the other day where he said, I've already picked the person. I think he might, maybe it is. Maybe he does have that person in mind. But at the end of the day, there's no way that he's not focused on what's going on right now and how soon he can wrap this up. I've known him enough that he's focused on getting this thing wrapped up. And if she doesn't drop out today or tomorrow or the next day, then it's going to be a knockout punch in South Carolina. Because just real quickly, and take Roland's analysis and keep going. Let's just say that she played on from South Carolina. Yeah. March 5th, Super Tuesday, you got 10 states, 874 delegates at stake. Trump's the only one who has an infrastructure built out that can handle that many states at once. So the question is, when and where does she want to have her last stand? I want to talk to Kyle quickly here before we go to Roland, just about the Canadian perspective here. We know the Liberal retreat was going on, that this was a topic, another potential Trump presidency. What do you think that would mean for this country? And even if he is, running against Biden, talk to me about how that could impact Canada.
Yeah, absolutely. I think maybe for the benefit of Sean and Roland, we have a Liberal Prime Minister here in Canada who continually attempts to paint Pierre Poilievre, our leader of the Conservative Party, as a Trump North. And this is really a desperate attempt to distract from the reality on the ground here in Canada. When the American election happens, it doesn't matter if the president at the end of the day is Joe Biden, Nikki Haley, or Donald Trump. Canadians here are suffering. We have an extreme housing crisis. Middle-class Canadians are being pushed out of house and home. They're having to pick between heating their home or putting food on the tables. We have homeless encampments sprawling up across the country. So I think at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who is in the White House. We need to focus on the issues that are pertinent here at home. And obviously, Liberals in this country and the NDP would have a different view of that. That's a conservative perspective. But Roland, let me get you to kind of zoom out here as well and look ahead at what could be a matchup between Donald Trump and Joe Biden once again. And how the court cases play in here, or do they? Because clearly they haven't played into the primaries at all.
Well, first of all, you got to understand, primaries are really for your hardcore voters. Okay, when you look at the vote totals, anyone knows you're not going to see massive turnout in primaries compared to the general. So that's just first of all. But here's a concern that Donald Trump has to have, even when it comes to these court cases. He can't lose moderates. He can't lose even those folks who are Republicans who maybe turn up on January 6th. And so he has to figure out a way, how do I reach those people? Now, you got two candidates, both of them are old, okay? I mean, the reality is Biden's old, Trump is old. And so it also comes down to what are you articulating and what is the vision forward? For Biden, look, you're seeing the economic indicators actually turn. And so those things are helpful. But really what this thing is going to boil down to, frankly, are 7 states: Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, North Carolina, Nevada, Arizona, Georgia. Those are going to be the critical 7 states. The other 43 are pretty much, we know exactly how those things are going to go. And so the question then now becomes, if you're Trump, how do you get over that 47% And then if you're Biden, how do you deal with so many young voters who've been turned off by his actions with regards to Israel and their fight with the Palestinians in Gaza? And so those are the two big things. I would say if there wasn't an attack in Israel, then it looks totally different when it comes to Biden and approval numbers. But he really has to now do some work to keep the coalition together that elected him in 2020. And the reality is the greatest person who can turn out Biden's coalition is Trump.
Okay, and so, Sean, let me ask you that. Do you think the White House right now is hoping that it's Trump for a rematch?
I do.
Hell yeah!
Oh, absolutely. Oh yeah. They're praying for it. But I would say Roland's mostly right. I actually think there's an 8th state, but it really doesn't matter. I think New Hampshire's 4 electoral votes are in play. But look, there's 2 issues at play here. Number one, the one thing, yes, both candidates are older, but I don't think that the Republicans have the same issues physically and mentally with Trump that they do with Biden. And you see that in poll after poll. 23% of Americans in the latest ABC News poll thought that Biden had the mental sharpness to be president. Right or wrong, that's just a reality. And the thing is that unless he becomes Benjamin Button, he's not getting younger. And that's something that they have to deal with every single day. And it's the physical and the mental images that they have to see. He was given a speech today. He fumbled multiple times, as he does almost every time. Then the other issue is that domestically, you've got the southern border, you've got our energy independence and the cost of, you mentioned home heating oil in Canada. Those folks in Wisconsin, Michigan, New Hampshire are all dealing with those same issues. The economic issues, higher interest rates. Then you deal with the foreign incursions that are happening. And one of the points that Roland made was can't be underscored. It's not just what's going on in Hamas and Israel. It's look at a state like Michigan. In 2016, Donald Trump won Michigan by 0.22% of a vote, 10,703 votes, right? So you take an issue where you've got a high population that affects, i.e. Michigan, in the Detroit suburbs, and you say if that's going to hurt him with young people and people who are really voting on that issue, he's going to lose Michigan again, that being Biden. So there's a lot of these intangibles. And frankly, I think it helps keep Georgia in play a lot more. There's a lot of these issues. New Hampshire, the number 2 issue tonight for voters, immigration. That's an area where fentanyl is really affecting a state like New Hampshire in New England. So there's a lot of issues that are driving people right now. And when you contrast Trump and Biden, and that's frankly what they're going to do, is say, I might not like Donald Trump's style, but here's where inflation was, here's where costs for heating oil and gas and food and rent were under Trump, and here's where they are under Biden, here's where the southern border is right now. I mean, there's a lot of issues that are going to transcend how much you like somebody or not when it comes to how we vote.
I'm going to go to Kyle here.
Well, also what's going to happen,
yeah.
But
go ahead, Roland.
I think what also is going to happen is if you're Biden-Harris, you're going to remind people that COVID took place, a worldwide pandemic, and so there really were 2 Trump terms, before COVID and after COVID, and you're going to say, who did a horrible job in managing it? So all of these things are going to come to bear, and like it or not, Trump still has to deal with January 6th, how that is being viewed as well. So people say, oh, that's not really a big deal. Listen, when you talk about margins, they matter. Ask all those Republicans who lost in Arizona in 2022 on those critical issues. And so that's what you have to understand what this is going to come down to. And remember, a year out in 1991, President George H.W. Bush was riding high with a 91% approval rating. A year later, he was packing. Things change in a matter of months in presidential elections in the United States.
All right, Kyle, I got 30 seconds left for a last word. I got to go to Katie Simpson here, who's got some news for us. But Kyle, last word to you.
Absolutely. You know, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau here in Canada, he continues to sling mud at the Republican candidate, Donald Trump. And, you know, that is concerning. As Sean and Roland have pointed out, Donald Trump is likely to be the Republican candidate for the presidential election. And we cannot continue to sling mud and attack, you know, a likely president of the most important trading partner and our most important ally in this country. Justin Trudeau is attempting to score cheap political points, and it's just not something that we need to be doing in this country.
Okay, a conservative Canadian perspective. Guys, if you can stick with us for just a couple of seconds here while we go to Katie, and we may come back to you. We might not because we're close to the top of the hour here, but let's go to our Katie Simpson. Our thanks to Roland Martin, Sean Spicer, and Kyle Jacobs. Katie is at that viewing party, which is going on right now in New Hampshire, where we're expecting to hear from the former president. Katie, what's the update there?
Well, we just saw Senator Tim Scott arrive. Of course, Senator Tim Scott was running to be a Republican presidential nominee, but he dropped out much earlier on after a debate, one of the later debates last year, and he endorsed Donald Trump. And so he arrived here tonight. We tried to ask him a couple of questions about whether it's time for Nikki Haley to drop out of this race or possibly shout some questions at him about whether he wants to be the VP. But certainly we're seeing a strong show of support for Donald Trump, not just among his voting base here. People were lined up for hours to get into the venue that is just sort of behind us right now. But we're seeing, some of the mega supporters of the Donald Trump Make America Great Again movement, the MAGA movement, as he calls it. We saw Marjorie Taylor Greene go into the building. She, of course, is a Republican congresswoman from Georgia. She is highly controversial, given her sharing of conspiracy theories. She's a highly controversial member of Congress down here. We saw Tim Scott, as I mentioned. We saw Vivek Ramaswamy, who, of course, also ran to be a Republican presidential nominee. He dropped out after a disappointing finish in Iowa and has since endorsed Donald Trump. He's here tonight. And then, of course, we saw George Santos, the disgraced congressman, the former congressman, who was expelled from Congress after a wild expenses scandal, criminal charges, and essentially he lied for political gain in a way that stunned American voters in ways that, unquantifiable ways, let's just put it that way. We're keeping our eye open to see if anyone else is coming in. No one's streaming out just yet because Donald Trump hasn't spoken yet, and people lined up for hours. He's the main event. They want to hear from him. The big question moving forward here, Nikki Haley says she is not going to quit. She's going to push forward to South Carolina, and that is her home state. And one of the Trump supporters we just spoke to a short time ago, who is very thrilled to see Donald Trump win this, he said, it's unfortunate Nikki Haley's going to go to her home state and get smoked. So that's sort of the sentiment here at the Donald Trump watch party.
All right, Katie Simpson on the story for us there in New Hampshire at that Trump viewing party. We will keep in touch with Katie and go back to her as soon as she has any other folks, possibly George Santos again, and we'll also make sure that we keep tabs on when the former president does speak. Let's go back actually now to our panel, our intersection panel. That's Kyle Jacobs, Associate Principal with Navigator, Roland Martin, the host and managing editor of the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show, and also Sean Spicer, the host of the Sean Spicer Show and former White House press secretary to the former president. Let me ask you, Sean, though, quickly, why is George Santos there? And does Donald Trump actually even care if he's getting George Santos as an endorsement?
No, and no. I think that the answer to the beginning part of your question, I think he probably has nothing else to do. But yeah, that's a little odd. One quick point, Joe, just to, everyone we taught, you mentioned waiting for Trump. Again, I'm keeping an eye on these votes. Right now, Trump is up about just near that 10-point mark. As I said to you earlier, I think Nikki Haley went out when I think she thought it would be as close as possible to make the race look like that there was a reason to go on. I will bet that Trump waits the opposite. He wants to make sure that he's as far away from her as possible in terms of percentage points. He's in no hurry. He's going to wait till that's a little bit lower so he can walk out and say something like, hey, I'm leading by over 10 points. She should drop out. But he has no rush to get out right now. And I think he wants to see a lot more of those towns and municipalities that are further out get their vote in, where I think he probably knows that he's going to do better.
Well, take us a little bit behind the scenes, Sean, if you would, and tell us kind of the conversations that are going on right now. Who is around him right now behind the scenes before he goes out and makes the speech?
So he's going to have that core team: Jason Miller, Stephen Chung, Chris LaCivita, Susie Wiles, the people who have been the nucleus of the campaign team. They're with him. If you saw the images of him in Iowa, those were the folks on the stage with him. I think Don Jr.'s up there, as well as Eric. You mentioned Laura. I believe that she's up there as well. But then you're going to have the core of that New Hampshire team. And what they're doing, I assume that they've had a pretty solid job. His state director is the former chairman of the state party up there, is that they're looking at the data as far as where their projections were. Did they get their people out to vote in each of these precincts? And you can pretty much tell based on where he ran last time, is he running about where he was last time? Is he running ahead? But there are certain towns and municipalities where they knew that they had a strong lead. They had identified their voters, they had called through them, they knew that, this person and that person and that person were with them and that they can check them off the rolls. They went there. And so they're telling Donald Trump right now, okay, based on the projections, we need Londonderry to come in, we need Salem to come in, and we expect, based on the number of people who voted in our track, that those people will come in strong for you, and we expect that we're going to do, X percentage there. So a good team in a state like New Hampshire knows what's out and where they expect to do well, and they're watching that come in and telling the candidate at the time, okay, the big cities, the Manchesters, the Concord, the Nashua, they're coming in early, they're bigger, they're going to probably be more sympathetic to a Haley voter, they're going to have more independent voters. You're going to look at a town like Bedford, where I think that they know that Haley had a better chance of getting unaffiliated voters. But they're going to tell them, here's where we think we're going to do a lot better and where our track shows you doing better. So let's wait till that comes in.
Roland, is there a path at all for Nikki Haley?
Say it again.
Is there a path at all for Nikki Haley here? Or is it just 2 seconds?
Hell no.
Hell no.
No, there's no path. Again, barring anything health-wise, there isn't a path. You look, the numbers are the numbers. I go back to 2020. People forget early primaries, Joe Biden doesn't do well. He wins South Carolina, he starts cleaning clocks because they saw what happened after South Carolina. You had more diverse states. Well, with Donald Trump, nobody in the party has been willing to put up a credible challenge. His core base, they are there. That's who turns out. Again, if you're Trump, your concern right now is, am I going to be able to get those folks to come to general? And so I've long said he is going to be the Republican nominee. Biden's going to be the Democratic nominee. The person tonight who should be slapping themselves, I think, is Congressman Dean Phillips and billionaire Bill Ackman for giving him $1 million to a super PAC. Dude, you spent all the time in New Hampshire. Biden was a write-in, and he got 73% of the vote. What does that tell you? This is going to be another race, 2020 all over again, Biden-Trump.
As we go into what could be Biden-Trump, looks like Biden-Trump, Kyle, I was talking on our Spotlight segment yesterday. We featured former Supreme Court Justice here in Canada, Rosalia Bella. And, part of that conversation was on divisions, not only in this country, but also in the United States. She's really worried about what is going to happen to our neighbors to the south. If it is a Biden-Trump matchup, if there are these divisions that, as she said, and paraphrasing here, don't want to put words in her mouth, but, we're catching the fumes of what's happening in America. Is that a concern for you if we do have a Biden-Trump rematch here?
I think in terms of having a Biden-Trump rematch, I think both potential presidents have a slew of challenges for Canada. We saw under a Trump presidency a renegotiation of the NAFTA agreement, but we also saw with a presidency, President Joe Biden, on his first day practically, he ripped up the Trans-Canada Pipeline Agreement. Both potential presidents have their challenges, and what we really need is a prime minister who is going to represent the best interests of Canadians. Just this past October, there was an Angus Reid poll that came out, and by a wide margin, Canadians feel that Pierre Poilievre would be the best representative to, bring Canada's perspective to the United States, to defend our values and our interests in potential negotiations or exchanges with the Americans. So I think that is something top of mind that Canadians are thinking about as we also go into our own federal election.
Well, the Canadian gets the last word again here, but we appreciate the Americans coming on with us as well to break this down.
Shocker!
Shocker, there you go. Listen, appreciate you all being with us here for the breaking news tonight. That wraps up our Intersection segment. Kyle Jacobs, Associate Principal with Navigator Roland Martin, host and managing editor of the Roland Martin Unfiltered, a daily digital show, and Sean Spicer, former White House press secretary under President Trump and host of the Sean Spicer Show, joined us here. We're going to have much more on this story coming up on the National at the top of the hour here, but you are looking live at that podium there. All eyes are on that because the former president going to claim victory in New Hampshire tonight. Listen, we were supposed to air part 2 of our Spotlight segment on Tantoo Cardinal. We're going to save that for you tomorrow as we head to the top here, and Adrian Arsenault awaiting you with all the news on the National. That is next. We'll see you tomorrow on Canada Tonight.